Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know many of you are here because sleep isn't always easy to come by, and for some reason, you find yourself awake in the middle of the night. Well, tonight, I've got a collection of chilling stories, true life horror experiences, and eerie encounters from the 1980s. These aren't just ghost stories, they're linked by something more sinister. A dark thread running through the past that ties these stories together. The houses and apartments we'll explore have hidden histories, forgotten tenants, long-buried crimes, and unsettling presences that seem to linger even after new owners move in. So, sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey into the dark corners of these homes. But I warn you, it might make you start looking at your own house a little differently. Let's dive in. Let me take you back to the early 1980s. A couple, fresh into adulthood and filled with excitement, rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. They thought they'd found the perfect place to start their life together. The apartment was modest, tucked in an unassuming building with peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. But what they didn't know was that their dream apartment had a dark history. At first, everything seemed fine. They got settled in, unpacked their things, and began enjoying their new life. But it wasn't long before strange things started happening. The kind of strange that you can't quite explain, but you know it's not just your imagination. They'd hear faint tapping noises in the walls, as if someone was trying to get their attention. At first it sounded like the old pipes, maybe the house settling, or just the wind playing tricks on them. But then it happened again, and again. And it wasn't just the sounds. Things began to move on their own. A book would shift slightly on a shelf. A glass would be knocked off the counter, but no one was in the room. One night, after weeks of unsettling events, the wife decided to ask their landlord about the apartment's history. The landlord was a quiet, elderly man who had been around for years, but his face went pale when she asked. He told them, in a shaky voice, that the apartment had been vacant for years before they moved in. But what he didn't tell them was that the previous tenant, a man in his 40s, had disappeared without a trace. It wasn't until much later that the couple discovered the man's death wasn't just a disappearance. He had been found not far from the apartment, murdered in what the police had called an unsolved case. The couple was shaken, but things didn't stop there. Soon, they realized that they weren't the only ones in the apartment. Late at night, the sounds grew louder, more urgent, footsteps pacing in the hall, whispers from the walls, and the feeling of being watched, even though no one was there. The longer they stayed, the more oppressive the air became. It was as if the apartment itself was breathing, exhaling its past onto them. I don't think they ever found peace there. The couple eventually moved out, leaving the building behind. But I wonder if they ever managed to leave the shadows of what they had discovered, and if the apartment is still haunted by the echoes of that long-forgotten tenant. Now, let's talk about a family who thought they'd found the perfect home in the suburbs, right in the heart of Maple Drive. In 1985, a young couple bought a spacious house, newly renovated, with plenty of room for their growing family. It was a beautiful home, with charming touches that made it feel warm and inviting, at least on the outside. After settling in, they noticed a few odd things. At first, it was little things, cold spots in the living room, flickering lights that would come on at odd hours, but they thought maybe it was just old wiring or the house settling, like they'd been told before, but soon they couldn't ignore it. They would hear the creaking of floorboards, soft whispers in the middle of the night, like voices calling them from the corners of the house. Doors would open and close on their own. And then there were the shadows. They'd notice fleeting glimpses of dark shapes moving across the rooms. But when they turned around, nothing was there. The wife would feel as if someone was standing right behind her. But when she spun around, she'd be met with nothing but empty air. But the most unsettling thing was the basement. The wife, curious about the history of the house, decided to explore it one afternoon. As she walked down into the dark space, she found something strange, an old compartment beneath the floorboards. It was hidden away, nearly forgotten. Inside were several photographs, some very old, some from the 1960s, showing a family that once lived there. And then she found one photo that made her blood run cold. It was of a man standing in the exact spot where her son had found the hidden compartment. His face was blurry, half in shadow, but his eyes were too real, too alive. The family soon discovered the darker truth about their new home. They traced the history of the house and found out that it had once been the scene of a brutal crime. The house had been the place where a family was murdered in their sleep. The case had gone cold, and the police had never been able to catch the killer. And then, the more the family dug, the more they realized that the presence in their home might not just be the spirit of the murdered family. It could have been the murderer himself, still haunting the house, or perhaps something far darker that had come with it. By the time 1986 rolled around, a young couple in New York thought they had found the perfect apartment. It was located in a historic building, one of those places that had charm and character. You know, the kind of place you'd want to make your own. But there was something unsettling about it that neither of them could put their finger on. At first, they chalked it up to the creaky floorboards and the old plumbing. But then they began hearing things, strange sounds like scratching on the walls, faint whispers in the middle of the night, and the feeling of being watched. The noises would come in the dead of night, just as they were trying to fall asleep. The wife, curious and a little unnerved, began asking around about the history of the apartment. No one seemed to know much, except that the previous tenants had left abruptly. They had only been there for a few months, and no one had ever seen them again. When she pressed the landlord for more information, he clammed up, acting strangely defensive. It wasn't until the couple decided to dig deeper into the building's past that they found something disturbing. The apartment had once been home to a man who had been involved in New York's underground scene during the 1970s, a man who had mysteriously disappeared in the early 1980s. The couple soon discovered that the landlord had been aware of the man's disappearance, but had never mentioned it to anyone. One night, the couple decided to investigate further and found a hidden room behind one of the walls in the apartment. Inside, they found old records, personal items, and a collection of cryptic writings. The room was filled with remnants of the man's life, his passions, his obsessions, and, as it seemed, his unfinished business. The apartment felt colder the longer they stayed. The whispers grew louder, the footsteps more distinct, and that's when they realized they weren't living alone. In 1987, a young couple excited about starting their life together purchased a charming Victorian home in a quiet, picturesque town. The house was gorgeous, spacious rooms, high ceilings, and beautiful woodwork. But there was one thing that caught their attention almost immediately: a locked door in the basement. They asked the real estate agent about it, but he brushed it off, claiming it was just an old storage closet. However, the couple couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. One night, after weeks of feeling uneasy, the husband decided to take matters into his own hands. He pried open the door. Inside, they discovered a small, hidden room that had clearly been forgotten for years. The room was filled with old photographs, journals, and a chilling discovery. A family had once lived there. Then they disappeared. The police had been unable to solve the case, but rumors had swirled that the family had been murdered by someone they knew, someone who was never found. The couple's discovery opened a floodgate of strange occurrences. They began hearing strange noises from the room, whispers in the walls, and even saw dark shadows moving across the house. They couldn't escape the feeling that the house, and whatever had happened there, was still alive. They tried to move on, but the house's past was too heavy. It felt as though they were living in someone else's nightmare. Finally, in 1988, a couple purchased a newly built home on the outskirts of town. They thought they had found the perfect place to raise their family. But after a few months, strange things started happening. The basement became a focal point, a dark, cold space that never quite felt right. At first, it was just the cold, then the smells, incense, something strange. Then they began hearing soft chanting at night, whispers in the walls, and soft footsteps echoing in the basement. They tried to ignore it, thinking it was just their minds playing tricks. But things didn't stop. One day, they decided to explore the basement and found bizarre symbols scratched into the beams. The more they uncovered, the more they realized this land had a dark past. Years ago, the neighborhood had been home to a cult that performed strange rituals. They worshipped ancient, forgotten gods and believed they could commune with the dead. People had disappeared, and many believed the cult's practices were responsible for these vanishings. The couple, now shaken, learned that their home had been built on the very land where the cult had once gathered. And it wasn't just the house that was haunted, it was the land itself, carrying with it the weight of the rituals, the disappearances, and the dark, twisted beliefs that had once flourished there. So, there you have it, 5 chilling stories that show just how dark history can hide behind the walls of our homes. Whether it's the forgotten tenant, the murderers still haunting the halls, or the ritualistic past that lingers in the basement, these homes are never truly empty. As you lay there in your bed tonight, listening to this, just know you might not be as alone as you think. Perhaps there's a whisper in the walls, a shadow watching from the corner. Keep your eyes open, or maybe, just maybe, close them and let these stories lull you into an eerie sleep. Stay safe and stay curious. Thanks for listening. And if you're ever in the mood for more strange and eerie tales, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell. Until next time.